Happy coding.
Hey there, happy coders, and happy new year, happy holidays, happy all of the things. It has been a while, a long while, since I've done one of these like code along videos. I used to do them pretty regularly, and then this past semester I was teaching a class. I also moved to a new state, so I just haven't had time for this kind of video in a while, but I'm hoping to get back into it, and this video is sort of my attempt at, I don't know, forcing myself to remember how all of this stuff works. Yeah, without further ado, my plan today is to work through a Genuary project, and I'll talk about that in a second, and maybe use P5 to make something cool and fun. I think maybe eventually I might get into playing with ChatGPT or something. Maybe, I don't know, but I'll likely do that in like a separate video. So for this video, what I want to do is first talk through Genuary. So Genuary is this event that happens every January, and it is this sort of I don't know, this event around creating generative art or digital art. And it happens sort of on social media. So I've been following it on Mastodon. But on whatever social media you use, you can check out the hashtag Genuary, and you can see what kinds of projects folks have been working on. So the way it works is every day in January, you get a different prompt, and you create something based on that prompt. So today's prompt is, let's see. So yeah, today's January 10th. So today's prompt is hexagonal. But I think instead of doing that, what I want to do is kind of go back and play with some previous prompts that are, particularly interesting to me. I've been kind of slacking off here in the new year, but I want to maybe just play with one that looks especially fun, and that is this one. January 5th. January was in the style of, I admit I don't know how to say her name, but Vera Molnár, I think. So if I go to this Wikipedia page, um, Vera Molnár was a artist. Looks like she just died back in December, so R.I.P. Vera. But looks like she did some very early digital art, which is really interesting. You can see like here's a picture of her with sort of her art behind her. Um, and I'll look at other art that she's done, but it kind of has this sort of, I don't know, interesting pattern where it's like digitally drawn squares, looks like, that get kind of randomized. So that's kind of interesting. And we'll take a look and see if we can get something working. So I encourage you to read more about Vera as you sort of dive into it. But for me, what I want to do is, for now, I'm going to look at a picture of the kinds of art that she did. So I'm going to go to image search here and just kind of get a sense of the kinds of things that she did. So again, looks like, from Wikipedia, I was reading this before. She was an early like computer artist. And so let's see, by 1959, she was making combinatorial images. And in 1968, she would use a computer to create her first algorithmic drawing. So this is all the way back in 1968, where computers were very different from what they are now, but she was still able to create art with them, which is really cool. So it looks like they were, maybe a mix of like shapes that were sort of algorithmically drawn and maybe a little bit different in each square. I really like these kind of scribbled squares. I think that might be what I end up doing. And there's a bunch of other sort of, this looks like maybe tile based, where you can maybe think of like procedurally generating different tiles and combining them. That's kind of cool. This kind of looks like post-it notes where each square is maybe just a little bit offset. That's kind of cool. More kind of scribbles. So yeah, there's a lot of different options we could play with. I like these. This is pretty cool. And yeah, so I'm kind of thinking that the way my code will work is by, first I'm going to think of each individual sort of cell and what it's doing. So each individual cell looks like what it's doing is kind of drawing a square that's like loosely connected, maybe like randomly sort of offset for each point. I'm not sure if they should be connected or not. This is all stuff we can play with. but looks like, some offset squares would take us pretty far. The other thing I'm not quite sure of is, are these connected or are these spirals? Like, is this a spiral that gets smaller? And I think no, because if I kind of squint, I can see that this is kind of disconnected. So, it's not a spiral. Maybe it's like, separate polygons that get smaller over time, or maybe just randomly sized. That might be interesting too. Then there's a bunch of other things we could do. I think I am going to go with that scribbly square approach, but there's a bunch of these really interesting looking patterns that we could explore. But for me, what I'm going to do is play with the squares. Oh, it looks like maybe add colors, maybe another thing we can play with as we go. So what I am going to do is jump over to the P5 editor. And what I want to do is, so eventually I want to have like a grid of these squares. Maybe I should like pop this open and do its own thing. Sure, yeah. So I'll have like maybe, a nested for loop that draws a grid of these things. But I want to focus on what happens inside a single cell or inside of a single like box in this grid, and that is it draws a series of squares or quadrilaterals that are kind of offset each point. So I can maybe think of maybe doing a function that does this. So function draw, I'll call it cell maybe, and this will take, I don't know, like an X and a Y, maybe a width height. So like cell width, cell height, to not confuse it with the width and height variables that P5 gives us. And then in here, what do I want to do? I want to draw a few squares or a few like, scribbled squares. I don't know if it should be the same amount in each. So maybe that's going to be another parameter we could give it. But for now, I'll just put it in a variable like const square count equals some hard-coded number. Let's say 5 for now. So in here, I'm thinking about this, and what I'm thinking is that this will eventually draw, like the whole thing, but maybe instead of trying to do everything all at once, maybe I'll just draw a single square. Maybe that's better. So I'm going to delete this for now. I'm going to forget about it. And what do I want to do? I want to create 4 points and sort of jostle them kind of randomly. So maybe I'll have another one that's like const, I don't know, max offset or offset maybe. And I don't know. I don't know what this number should be. This is like how much I'm wiggling the point. So I'll give it like 25. And now what do I want to do? I want to create 4 points. So 1, 2, 3, 4 to create my square. And maybe just to get started, I'll not jostle them at all. I'll just say const x1. I'll do like x1, y1, x2, y2, etc. equals. I'm just going to say x for now. Const y1 equals y, and then const x2 equals x plus cell width. So I'm going like from the upper left to the upper right. Const y2 just equals y again. And now I have a pattern in my brain. Const x3, this is going to be the bottom right point, equals x plus cell width. Right, and const y3 equals y plus cell height. Finally, const x4 equals x, and then const y4 equals y plus cell height. There's probably a better way to do this, but I just want to get something working. And now what I want to do is use those points. So I'm going to open up the P5 reference and look for a function that lets me draw 4 points. I think there is one. I just don't remember it off the top of my head. So reference. And okay, so what am I looking for? I'm looking for a function that draws a quadrilateral. So quad looks pretty promising. And what does this take? This takes x1, y1, x2. Yeah, this takes what I want. All right, cool. So this is the quad function. So I'm going to call quad with all these variables, x1, y1, x2, y2, x3, y3, and finally x4, y4. Okay. And I need to actually call this thing. So let's give it, I don't know, let's just call draw cell with, let's give it hard-coded numbers for now. So like, I don't know, 50, 50, 200, 100. So I should expect kind of like a long but not very tall rectangle. Let's see. And there you go. All right, cool. And this is, I think, a bug in P5. I'm going to ignore that. So I've got this function that takes a x and a y and a width and a height and then draws a square. Right now I'm just drawing, I'm going to use the word square, but it's, just a rectangle or a quadrilateral. Right now I'm just drawing it straight like x, y with height, but what I want to do is introduce that like jostling to it. So how do I want to think about this? I think what I want to do is maybe just add some randomness to this every time. I'm trying to think of, will that be good enough? I've got 4 points and I think I want them to connect. I think I'm going to make that judgment call. But let's just see what happens if I do plus random, and then I'm going to say negative offset offset. So this is, I'm taking my x value, which is whatever value I'm giving it. In this case, it's 50. It's the the parameter I'm passing in, and then I'm adding a random number between negative offset and offset. So in this case, it's between negative 25 and 25. So I'm moving it randomly by 25 pixels, either left or right. That's what this sort of magic line of code does. And that will give me sort of a, kind of a randomly placed point around this x value. So I think I basically want to do this exact same thing for every single variable I have here. So I could play with the width a little bit more. I don't know if I want to go all the way to width. I don't know if it really matters all that much, but I'm just going to get something working first before I fiddle around with it. So I'm going to jostle all my points around. I could maybe put this in a function or something, but whatever. Okay, so now I would expect kind of a randomly drawn rectangle, and I think it's going to freak out because it's, I'm drawing it every single frame, but let's just see. And yeah, okay. I think I'm getting what I want. It's each point is sort of randomly wiggling around the sort of corner that it's specified. I also don't want to draw the white color that's filling in, so I could probably turn that off by calling no fill. And now I get kind of a randomly jostled one. And actually, if I take this call to background, let's just see what happens if I move this up to setup. And yeah, kinda, maybe it fills up the screen way too fast, but you can see that there's like a minute where, a moment, I guess, where it looks sorta kinda like what I'm going for, almost. So, I think I'm on the right track. I think the next thing I would need to do is sort of only draw a few of them. So this is getting back to that for loop that I was going to start with at the beginning. And I need to make them smaller, I think. I think that's the other sort of key here, because it's not so much that they're random, it's that they're, they all kind of fit inside of a box and then they get kind of smaller and smaller. That's the way I perceive it anyway. There's probably other ways to think about it. So with that in mind, what I want to do is maybe create like a for loop that loops, however many times, 5 times, and decreases the size of my bounding box. So let's think about that. So if I have this square count variable, which is just the number of times I want to loop, just so I can play with that, and I have an offset, do I would just want to decrease the width and the height each time, keep the same offset, or do I actually want to decrease the offset as well? let's think about this. So I'm going to create my for loop. For let I equals 0, I is less than square count, and then I plus plus. So put all of that in a for loop. And next, what I want to do, so right now all I'm doing is drawing 5 of these squares. It's just going to basically speed up my animation with my current setup. So yeah, now it's going to fill it up really fast. So instead, what I want to do is sort of do what I just said, like decrease the size of the cell, but keep it kind of centered around the same center point is how I'm thinking about it. So there's a couple things I could do. In P5, I could call, what was it called, like rect mode or something. So I could just always give a center point instead of giving like an upper left corner, and then sort of decrease the width of my rectangles or squares, but they're still centered around the same point. Or I could do that kind of math myself and add a little bit to the points to sort of do the shrinking, because if I only decrease the width and the height, I'll still draw it from the upper left corner, which is not what I want. I want it to be sort of centered, so I need to change the X and Y as well. So thinking about how I want to do that, I think what I could do is create another variable, which is like, so this is offset is, like the wiggling offset, I might call it, or the random offset. I want another offset, which is like const, like it's like the shrink factor or something, like let's say like, I don't know, I could just call it shrink factor. I'm thinking of whether I want this to be like an integer, like it's a number that I'm decreasing the width by and adding to X, or if I want this to be like a multiplier. I'm also realizing this is going to kind of depend on how many squares I have, or how scrunched I want my end result to be. So maybe it should be a multiplier. But then now I'm thinking, if I make this a multiplier, should the rest be multipliers? And that's going to get kind of messy and annoying. So I think I just want to get something working, and then I can always fiddle around with it. I want to, I'm going to be annoying because I have 2 offset variables. I want to change this to like, I don't know, like random offset or max offset. I was going to call it random offset. Change all of these. Probably a better way to do this renaming, but whatever. I also tend to write really long lines of code that want to wrap. Okay, so I think I haven't really changed anything yet. Yeah, okay, cool, still works, but I'm just obsessing over what to name my variables. So now I can have maybe like a const like layer offset, and this is going to equal some number. I could create another variable. I'm just gonna hard code it for now. Times I. So as I gets bigger, my layer offset will also increase. Okay. So then this math is going to get a little gross, because what I need to do is for each point, I need to add or subtract my layer offset from it. So here we go. I'm just going to do it. My first point is in the upper left, so I need to add my layer offset to it. Do I want to divide by 2? I'm either going to need to divide by 2 here or multiply by 2 when I do the other one. So I'll divide by 2 here. Same thing here. plus layer offset divided by 2. Okay, now this is where it gets interesting. So x2, this needs to be, so this is the right edge of the cell. So it's going to be x plus the cell width, which is the very right edge. Now I need to do minus layer offset. Is that true, or does this need to be divided by 2? I actually think I don't need to do this divided by 2. So if I was dealing with pure like widths and heights, I would, if this took like, x, y, width, height, I would need to have that either halved or multiplied. But because I'm dealing with straight points, I don't need to worry about it. Okay. If that doesn't make sense, that's okay. I'm going to just keep going. So this is now minus layer offset because I'm subtracting from the right edge, and y2, this is still going to be plus. So plus layer offset. And now I've got my pattern. Whenever I do a plus, whenever I need to do a plus a width, I need to do minus. Whenever I do plus a height, I need to do a minus. I don't do that here, so it's a plus, and I do it here, so it's a minus. Okay, so that was a lot of code, and I don't love, that's fine formatting, okay. So what I expect to happen now is, I'm gonna do a no loop here just to do it one time. What I expect is I'm going to call draw cell with my hard-coded numbers so far, and it is going to draw 5 cells. In fact, I need to increase this to something that'll actually work. It's going to draw 5 sort of squares inside of the cell, and each square is going to get a little smaller, but it's going to be, each one is going to be like kind of randomized. So that's what I expect to happen, but let's see. And yeah, sort of. So this did work, I think. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cells. I think there's a couple things happening. One, I think my offset is way too much. This number is way too much as well. But I think it worked. I think it mostly worked. So I can fiddle with what these numbers should be. Yeah, I could imagine if I did a bunch of these, it might be okay. It might look interesting. If I did these in sort of, rows and columns, it might end up looking like this. So I'm pretty okay with this. I could also, increase some of these numbers. So I could increase this to 10. Towards the middle, it does weird things because you're subtracting like more than the, the size of the square, but I think that's kind of okay actually. I could also play with this, I could make this smaller now that I have them in variables. This is a little less random, so I actually like that. I don't know if I love that they're all connected. I think I could maybe play with disconnecting them sometimes, but for the most part, I think it's okay. So the next thing I want to do is put this in a nested for loop. So let's think about that. Right now I'm just drawing a hard-coded cell. The other thing I could do is play with this a little bit. So mouse X, mouse Y, 200, 200. So now it's just going to follow my mouse around. And if I do no loop, does this work? I don't know. No, it doesn't. So I've got to have this, and maybe if I change this to mouse pressed, how about that? There we go. Okay, sort of. It's really slow. I don't know why. I would not expect it to be that slow. Weird. I don't think anything goofy is happening here, but yeah, my computer really is not happy with that. But it works. I don't know how interesting it is, but it works. But let me put this back. So I want to get back to drawing that nested for loop. So there's a couple places I could store these variables. Maybe I'll put them at the top. So const, maybe I'll say like rows and columns. So, or columns and rows. So columns equals, some number. I don't know, how many do we have in here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I that's cool. We can start with that. 7, and then const rows equals also 7. And so what I need to do is calculate a few things. So I'm going to have like const cell width equals the width of the whole screen divided by the number of columns, and const cell height equals height divided by rows. And then I can do for, let's see, let C, so I want to do it by column and then by row. Sure. Equals 0. C is less than columns. C++, not to be confused with language. And then the same thing for R, for let R equals 0. R is less than rows. R++. And in here, I want to call my function, draw cell with what? An X and a Y and a width and a height. So cell X, I haven't actually figured out what that value is. Cell Y, cell width, and cell height. So now I need to figure out what this cell X and cell Y is. So cell X, I think is, I think this is just going to be C times cell width. Is that right? So on 0, it's going to be cell width. On 1, it's on 0, it's going to be 0 because 0 times cell width is 0. On 1, it's going to be cell width. On 2, it's going to be, yeah, okay, I think this is right. So const cell Y equals R times cell height. All right, maybe. So now I've got my for loop, and I don't know. Let's just run it and see what happens. I think it'll probably do goofy things because now my squares are going to be a lot smaller, but let's just see. Man, that is so much slower than I thought it would be. Why? That feels, I'm very suspicious that it's so slow. It shouldn't be that slow. But whatever, it did something. I think it actually did what I want it to, but let's see. So this is what I was getting at earlier, where maybe I should have used multipliers instead of, pure like pixel values here, because now it kind of, the number that these should be depend on what these are, which is kind of annoying because if I change it here, I've got to change it everywhere, but maybe that's okay. So let me just decrease these a little bit. Yeah, okay, so I think it's doing what I asked it to. I've got, 3 by 3 squares, and they are sort of following the pattern. I don't know why it's being so slow. I don't know if it's this. Like, should this be at the end of draw, maybe? I don't think that makes a difference, but I don't know. I'm just trying stuff. No, okay, yeah, see, it drew one. It's like, it takes so long to draw that single frame, but all I'm doing is drawing like 5 rectangles. That should not matter. All right, so something weird is happening, but maybe it's because I'm like recording my screen. My computer is not happy with me. I got a new camera. I don't know. Maybe it's unhappy because I'm asking to do too much, but whatever. I guess I don't blame it. Okay, so from here, I think I've got the basics working, and from here I could fiddle with these numbers quite a bit. I could, increase the size quite a bit. So let's see what 500 by 500 looks like. Yeah, maybe. Let's see if I can go up to 600. Oh, I'm going to be covering some of it, aren't I? Yeah, sorry. You see my dumb face instead of the thing. Welcome to my YouTube channel, I guess. But yeah, let me put that back down to like 400 or 500 just so I'm not blocking the screen. Yeah, all right. I'm in this corner. I gotta hide. But whatever. You can look. Wait, that way. You can look that way, over there. Okay, so I think this is fine. I think I could play with these numbers and change these quite a bit. Let's see what happens if I make them different. Does it do what I want? They should now be kind of squished. And yeah, they're kind of squished. All right, cool. So I do think I want to be able to turn these up without breaking everything. So I want more to make it interesting. I mean, that looks pretty good. The other thing I definitely want to do is play with color. So I'm going to change this to like inverse it just to make it slightly more interesting. I'll probably come back to that in a second. But instead of gray, now it's that kind of cool black on white or gray on white, or white on gray, I guess. So color is one thing I want to play with, but I also want to play with, like, I don't know, the idea of separation. And so that's too much. Whatever. Right now there's a lot of overlap because I'm giving it the full like width and height of the cell, and it's okay, but I think one of the things that makes this interesting is, I don't know, you can kind of, there's more separation of each grid, of each cell. And I don't know, maybe it's fine the way it is, but I think it's relatively easy because the way I want to do it is I'm going to increase this by 1. I want to start on, instead of starting on the 0th layer, I want to start on the first layer, and I'm going to go for one more layer. Yeah, seems easy enough to do, so let's try it. Yeah, maybe. It's still, you're still at the mercy of the random number generator. So this number and this number I can play with. So my random offset is 10. What if I make this just 5? Kind of small. Man, it is so slow. Yeah, I think we're getting at something. I think that's kind of cool. So yeah, maybe. And yeah, from here, there's a bunch of things I could play with. Like, I'm pretty happy with this, actually. I could post this on Mastodon under the hashtag Genuary and feel pretty good about, 30 minutes of work. And from here, you could play with a bunch of stuff. You could, fiddle with these numbers or add color or add animation. I'm kind of wondering, what I should do. I think all of the above sound pretty fun to me, and I'll give myself another half hour maybe to play around. So from here, what do I want to do? What sounds most interesting? First off, color is pretty easy to play with, I think. So what I can do is I can make every quad a random color. So my favorite line of code, ready for it? Stroke random 255. I think technically this should always be like 256, but yeah, whatever. Random 256, random 256. Okay. And yeah, blast off. Let's see what happens. So I expect every sort of shape to have its own random color. And I hear Jeff's voice in my brain yelling at me that I shouldn't be using RGB, but whatever, I like RGB. But yeah, it's kind of cool, where every square or every kind of, shape has its own random color. I like that. Random color is kind of my favorite. So yeah, I could keep playing with this. I can always play with color. So RGB, what if I just make this 0? So it's just kind of shades of green and blue. You can play with the sort of the colors that you give yourself. There's a word for that, but this is now blue and green, and so many other things I could keep playing with. But color is super fun to play with. The other thing I could do is play with animation, and so I'm thinking of, there's a couple ways I could animate this. I could maybe make them show up one at a time. That would be cool instead of doing it all at once. I could also kind of replace one at a time. It's kind of fun. So to do that, maybe what I'll do is I'll move some of this around. I want to do some refactoring. So I'm going to move these. So let cell width. In fact, I could probably stop using these as parameters and just have these as global variables. I think that could do that. Get away with not having them here, since I always pass in the same numbers. Yeah, okay, why not? but I do need to set them. So we need this to be somewhere in here. Let's say here, why not? So I'm setting these sort of global variables up here. Just kind of refactoring my code to make this next step easier. So I want to get rid of this now. And now I want to move this, yeah, up into setup. So I'm drawing everything in setup. Whoops. I'm drawing everything in setup. So at this point, nothing should change. Let's just run this and see what happens. I think I put the color back, so it should go back to being completely random. And yeah, I don't know why it's so slow. I think it's my computer's fault, but whatever. But yeah, okay, so we're back to, this works. And the next thing I want to do is add something in draw where I generate, let's say like a C and a R randomly. And then I draw my cell. So yeah, so it's kind of goofy the way I did it. I could maybe, instead of passing in X and Y, pass in like an R and a C, because I'm going to do this math kind of every single time, but it's not that much math, so it's okay. Also, I don't know if I'm going to keep this, so we'll see. Okay, so let's see what I want to do. I want to generate my C and my R. So instead of having in a for loop, I want to just randomize it. So const C equals what? I want a random number between 0 and columns, right? Yes. Yes. So I can call the random function with columns, and I want to sort of truncate that down to a whole number. So I think, is there like an int? Yeah, there is. Here we go, int. So this takes like a 10.31 and gives me 10. So I want to take my random number, which could be 3.45, and just convert that to a 3 so that I'm always at like a hard number. You can play with it if what happens if you don't have that in. See what happens. And then same thing for R equals int of random of rows. So now what I expect is randomly each frame, one of these cells will be redrawn. So it might be a little too quick, but let's see. I can kind of predict a couple things that are going to go wrong, but let's just see what happens. And yeah, okay, it is it is doing it. It is doing something, and that's actually kind of cool looking. And it's weird because I don't think this is at 60 frames per second either. Something's weird with my computer. But it does look kind of cool. I could imagine making a GIF out of this and saying, here's my submission. It's kind of trippy. But what I originally intended was it to like redraw the whole cell, not to draw, more stuff on top of it. So, to get around that, what I want to do is draw a rectangle. So I want to clear it out. Basically, I want to draw like the background. And I kind of think there might be another function for this. Background. There's maybe like clear is what I'm looking for. I thought there was a function that just kind of cleared out a specific section. But whatever. I mean, I'm pretty sure that the rect function will do it for me. So what do I want to do? I want to call no stroke, and I want to call fill of my background color, which is 32. I don't know why I copy pasted that. And then I want to draw a rectangle at XY, cell width, and cell height. So I'm basically like stamping the background over my previously drawn cell, and then redrawing everything. So now I need to go back to no fill after this. Okay. And then later I call stroke, right? Yeah, I do. So let's see what this does. So first I'm going to draw everything, and then I'm going to sort of replace the contents of a random cell each frame. And yeah, it's definitely not 60 frames per second anymore, but huh. Yeah, it's still kind of cool. It's still pretty trippy. Um, and I kind of like this. Um, the other thing I could play with is making this a little more interactive. So I could make it so like when you click or maybe mouse over, that's when I change it. So maybe it's not random every time. Maybe it's, based on click. You can click to change the contents um, of a particular cell. But I think for my purposes, I kind of like this randomness. So from here, let's see. So I could play with another couple things. I'm really tempted to play with these parameters. So square count is 10. I think 10 is okay. Let's see what happens if I take that down to like 5. So yeah, that looks, interesting. It looks a little bit, more sparse maybe. The one thing I'm sort of realizing now, just looking at this, so I decreased this number from 10 to 5, so I'm only drawing 5 squares. But what I'm noticing is that fifth square is really small. So 1, 2, that's really hard with this animation. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, yeah. So that fifth one is really small to the point where it's so small that it's kind of malfunctioning. It's not really a quadrilateral or kind of that misshapen square. It's kind of crisscrossy sometimes, and that's because sometimes I'm subtracting a number from the right edge or adding a number to the left edge, and it is they're kind of switching places because the offset is now larger than the width of the whole thing, which is, maybe fine. But what it means is that when I have this number at 10, what's actually happening is I'm drawing those 5 squares. They're getting smaller and smaller. The fifth one is really tiny, so that's weird. And then I draw 5 more. And so the second 5 squares in any particular cell are actually smaller. They're so small that they've gotten bigger. So I'm subtracting from the right edge so that it's now the left edge, and I'm adding to the left edge, which is now the right edge. And same thing with the top and bottom, which is, fine, but is a little different than what I was sort of, originally intending the code to do. And I think there's a relatively easy fix for this. So I think I can just kind of switch a couple of things around. So basically, I think I just need this number to be 5. So now I'm no longer decreasing by 10. So let me change this to 5 to convince myself. So I'm only going to draw 5 squares in each cell. Oh my goodness, so slow. But now they're kind of still, at the outer boundaries. So if I draw 5 more, if I change this to 10, they'll sort of fill in that space instead of getting so tiny that they get big again. So I think that's a relatively easy fix. I'm kind of annoyed at how I did this because these numbers are going to depend on cell width and cell height, which they themselves depend on columns and rows. So in hindsight, maybe I should have gone with that multiplier approach where instead of subtracting, 10 or whatever pixels, I multiply by the width of the cell. But yeah, whatever. I think it's good enough. Okay, cool. So wrapping up, what do we do today? Let's see. First off, I started by looking at Genuary. So if this was, kind of interesting to you, I strongly recommend checking out Genuary.art, or, on your favorite doom scroller of choice, check out, the hashtag Genuary. And I focused on the January 5th prompt, but you can choose whatever prompt you want. For this prompt, I read about Vera Molnár and the art that she has created. I sort of perused and zeroed in on this kind of, weird square art, which I am really into. And then I started small. I think that's pretty important. I started with just a single square. It wasn't even, randomly scribbled around at all. It was just a single square. Get that working. And from there, I added some randomness. I added, layers of adding or drawing like 5 of the squares. I added this grid with this for loop, and then finally I added some animation where it draws a random one each time. But the important part is I worked iteratively. I worked on one small piece at a time and got that working before like daydreaming too much about what I could do next. So if you sort of found this interesting, you could take the code I wrote and fiddle around with it. So, change these numbers to, make it 100 by 100. What happens when you do that? What else needs to change when you do that? You could change some of these numbers or play with the color. You could also draw maybe like different shapes. So instead of squares here, you could do, I don't know, like stars or hearts or, triangles or circles. All of those could be pretty interesting to play around with. You could also go back to sort of the drawing board and, well, Vera Molnár's drawing board and look through her art and see if there's anything that resonates with you and try to create it yourself. So I don't know, this one looks pretty cool. I can kind of imagine how I might start to write code that does that. This one's really cool. Oh man, I'm kind of disappointed I didn't see this ahead of time because I think I would have gone with this one. That one's really cool looking. But you could find your inspiration and go from there. Oh, this one's really trippy. But anyway, you could do exactly what I did, but with your own sort of inspiration, and it would work the same. You would start small, get something working, and then work iteratively from there, improving it to achieve your overall goal. Cool. So hopefully that was interesting. Hopefully that wasn't too painful for my first video in several months. I'm trying to get back into it, so we'll see how it goes. But that's where I'm going to call it. So if you found this interesting, I'd love to hear from you. Please leave a comment either on YouTube or better yet, if you come to happycoding.io, you can check out our forum. This is where I hang out. So if you post your code here, I will definitely see it, and I would love to hear from you if you make like a remix of this or do your own thing. I'd love to see it. But that being said, without further ado, thanks for watching. Have a great rest of your day. Happy January. And as always, of course, happy coding.